It's DUG24. 24 hours, 24 sessions, 24 speakers, 100% Microsoft Dynamics. It's unparalleled, unprecedented, and undeniable fun with your hosts Beau Schwieso and Bobby Small. Let's get into it with another episode of DUG24.
And Alex, if you're ready, I heard you speak up. We'd love to have you start and give us a couple of minutes, and we'll give everybody time to get over and get set up for April.
Yeah, for sure. Let me go ahead. I think we should be good to go. All right. Beau. Awesome. All right. Well, first off, thank you everyone for joining today. A lot of really good stuff. I've had this on in the background kind of all morning, watching along. Really, really good content. So thank you to Bobby and Beau. Thank you to the speakers as well, and thank you for the sponsors for supporting this. So what are we going to be talking about today? Really, we're going to be focused on this session is looking at taking AI and using it to help analyze large amounts of data in your D365 environment. I'm a more technical guy, so I always kind of take it and put a slant on it from that perspective. And so I wrote this session or designed this session to look at it from an administrative side, right? What can we optimize or look at remediating in a D365 environment to, look for either users that are over provisioned, have too much access, or users that don't have the correct access, things like that. So really trying to take and uncover some of those hidden optimizations, right? That that exist within your D365 environment. So before we jump into this, want to do a quick intro about myself. My name is Alex Meyer. I'm a principal software engineer with a company called Delinea. Used to be Delinea acquired FastPath, which is where a lot of people probably know me from. And so I'm still working on doing really cool security audit and compliance functionality. Been in the dynamic space since 2013. Been a part of the Microsoft MVP program since 2019. Was just recently renewed for that. So keep doing really cool stuff for another year there. And I've spoken at a number of sessions, Summit, DUG, used to be called Focus in the US and in Europe, and talking about these types of more technical type sessions, and then and doing webinars along with that. And so I really like to talk about all things dynamic security, licensing, and like we're talking about today, putting AI to work against your ERP data, right, to try and distill some of that down. And so session today has a couple different topics that we're going to be looking at covering in this case. First off, I try to level set, right, and I want to make sure that we're all kind of using the same jargon or the same terminology, right? So talking about what is and isn't AI, right? Talking about large language models, and really distilling that down and making sure we're not overusing the term AI, which I think obviously I think that's crept into our normal conversations, right? That everything's kind of this AI and it's kind of a black box and it can be whatever you want it to be, right? So really want to put a fine point on what that actually is. And then we're going to kind of jump outside the bounds of just D365 and talk about, what is the right way to start looking at prompts, right? When you're trying to create something to go and analyze large amounts of data, right? How do you actually, design the prompt to tell the AI or large language model how you actually want to analyze that data? And then at the core of this session, right, we're going to look at 3 different ways to actually gather the data that you're going to use as part of your data analysis, whether that's manually exporting the data from the source system, in this case, finance and supply chain, right? Whether you want to use an API via your AI of choice, right? So whether that's Copilot or Claude is the example that I'm going to use today. And then also looking at MCP, right? So how do we set that up? What does that look like, right? And we're going to do the same analysis across all three of those, right? And so we can see the difference of how we actually connect and get that data. There's two real world F&SC optimization scenarios that I have. One is about kind of the one we talked about initially about trying to find users and roles that may be either overassigned from a user perspective or maybe roles that aren't assigned, just looking for things that we can clean up. The other one is actually about specifically about licensing, right? To see if we can take some of this F&SC data that it has, right, and look for licensing optimizations. So we'll look at both examples on how we kind of approach those. And then at the end of this, right, we'll have some takeaways and resources, things that we need to keep in mind from there. So, and then free resources that are available online if you want to continue this journey along the way. So I always like to kind of start to say, what are we hoping to, learn at the end of this, right? And so we really want to first off have a working understanding of kind of core AI terms, right? So what is and isn't AI? What are large language models? What's the model context protocol or MCP, right? So instead of just, referring to these and expecting everybody to kind of know them, right? How are we actually defining those? You'll have some tips for writing good AI prompts and analyzing your data, and you'll know of ways to improve those going forward. Like we talked about, we'll have those three different ways of connecting to gather your AI data that you're going to analyze. And then again, we'll have those two real world D365 optimizations. We'll show you what they look like when I gathered the data, how you could actually go and run these. In both of these scenarios, you could take and actually run them today, right? So if you wanted to, along with, of course, joining the rest of DUG24, if you wanted to take these back and run these in your environment, you absolutely could. All right, so we can go ahead and we'll jump right in to the first section here, right? So we're talking about, first and foremost, AI and large language models overview, right? Kind of setting up these key core concepts before we jump in to analyzing the data. So first and foremost, right, what is and isn't AI? So I think first and foremost, it's almost easier to kind of describe what is an AI because we're all used to that. This is kind of where everybody was kind of at before this transformation started happening, right? And then we can talk about what is AI. So if we're trying to look and separate these two things, I think a lot of the times the idea of an automated workflow sometimes gets grouped into this idea of an AI, right? But anything that's going to follow a rule-based process. So if you can kind of build that, in the old model, right? If you were building, a Power App that had some workflow, right? That said, hey, when this event happens, I want you to go and do this, or if this input happens, I want you to go and do that, right? Anything that's following that rule-based approach, or processing this based on a set of rules, right? That really isn't AI in that case, right? Because if I give the input on day 1 and I give the same input on day 10, right? Those things are going to be the same, right? It doesn't matter, when I message or what additional, context I'm giving that workflow, right? If I get for this single input, right, I'm always going to get the same output. So the example that, I think, what I have talked about in the past, right, is if you have a workflow to go out every morning and give you the weather report, right, and bring it back to you and send, maybe deliver to your phone or have that as part of your, daily morning routine, right? That's not really AI using that, right? That's going out and making an API call to get the weather for today and bring it back. And so switching over to what is AI, right? So any system that's applying reasoning or interpreting that data as part of the response is more of what we're looking for when we talk about AI. And it's going to deliver that response based on the context of weighing the input, right? And trying to figure out what you would like based on the question that you're asking. And then it's going to apply the reasoning on the data it's given. So instead of having in the previous example, right, we talked about, going out and just giving me the weather report every day. If I can ask your system, right, should I bring an umbrella? Okay, well, it needs to go, all right, to answer that question, I need to go out and get the weather data. I need to see, is it going to actually be raining, right, for your location and the time that you're going out, right, and bring it back to you, right? And then it can answer that question, so that's more of the AI approach, whereas, in the previous example, it's just bringing back your weather data, right? So it's kind of separating out what is and isn't AI in this case. All right, so we've defined AI, right? So AI, artificial intelligence, is kind of built on top of these large language models, right? And LLMs, large language models, that kind of, again, are used ubiquitously, right, across, different things sometimes. But really, the LLM, the idea behind this, right, is it's the brain of the AI, right? So the whole concept of large language models is that it has all of these different parameters, right, in it, and then they are weighted based on the relevance it has to your particular input. And so these large language models can have billions, if not trillions, of different input parameters, and these are all going to be weighted across the entire model, right? And then based on the input data that you give, right, the large language model is going to determine, okay, based on that, I'm going to look to see what the highest probability of a response, right, coming back should be, right? So it's really trying to analyze all those different words and the data that you're providing it and trying to predict the next response in that particular process. So when we talk about this idea of intelligence, right, AI in its current form doesn't really have intelligence. All right, it's just predicting what you want based on the input that you're giving it, right? And it's outputting what it thinks your expected response should be, right? And so, and sometimes as these models get better, right, it's getting closer and closer to, in some people's view, to becoming intelligent, right, where it can actually go above and beyond that. But right now, it's just predicting. It's a very, very good prediction model, right, and it does that very, very well, to the point where you may not be able to tell the difference between the AI having actual intelligence or not. But that's really what it's doing behind the scenes. The one key point, if you can take away anything from the session today, that I like to kind of point out, is that AI is not deterministic. And that's really the biggest difference between an AI and then our old workflow models of the past, right? And so non-deterministic is just a fancy way of saying that if I give it the same input, right, it could produce different outputs. And that's kind of a fundamental shift, right, of anything that we've delivered in the past. It's always kind of been from a business perspective. If I give the same input to this model, I want the same output, right? If I give the same input to this process, right, I want the same output every time, right? I want a one-to-one match. And AI doesn't do that. Based on its core, right, can't be deterministic in that case. And so, based on the input that you give it, if you ask that question tomorrow, right, or a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, right, you may get different answers because of the training that model has. It's going to learn more about you. It's going to try and determine like what you type of answers you want, right? So that response, right, may change as you go across this, right? And so we're going to talk about, when we look at the prompts later on, is how can we get this to be, from a business perspective, right? How can we start to, eliminate maybe some of those differentiations, right? Because we want to try and make sure that we're getting the correct answers here. So, but yeah, I just wanted to give this kind of larger background here of the large language models. And this kind of leads into, I think, one of the things, as we kind of talk, the different sessions earlier today have given some really, really cool examples of using AI in all these different systems. And I think one of the things that, maybe hasn't taken off as quickly is, seeing this AI revolution coming into business applications in general, right? And so one of the questions that I get quite a bit is, why hasn't AI taken over ERP more so, right? Why don't we just see AI models that are just, you're just conversing like Microsoft has, shown in the past, where you don't really have an ERP anymore. You're just conversing with an AI, right, to be able to generate this. And I think, this has been harped on a number of different sessions earlier today, right? But if you go and look at Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, they all kind of have one little disclaimer right at the bottom that makes this a little bit difficult for business end users, right, to swallow. And it's the fact that, again, right, these systems can make mistakes, right? And so you always want to make sure, as many presenters before me have said, that you're keeping a human in the loop, right? And not just letting AI running wild in your business application, right? Because that can lead to a lot of really, really potentially bad things if you're not making sure that you know exactly what all of these AI agents are actually in large language models and AI agents are doing. All right, so we talked about AI in general. We talked about large language models, right? And in the agenda today, right, I talked about MCPs. So what is an MCP itself? That it's, again, another fancy name here for it stands for Model Context Protocol. This was initially designed by Anthropic, but has become like an industry standard across here. And it's really just a way for AI models to talk to external data sources and kind of fitting that middle layer, right, to know, well, how do I go and get that data? What does the data look like, right, when I'm going to these external sources, and letting the AI kind of determine what data do I need to go and get so that I, can answer the questions here, right? And so it really is just this the middle layer between your AI or large language model and an external data source. So in our case, we're going to use that external data source is going to be D365 itself, right? And we're going to put our MCP middle layer in between, and then now I can start to ask questions against my D365 data and get responses back. But the questions or the prompts that I'm going to ask it can be in normal English, right? And the system, the MCP itself, is going to figure out, well, to answer this question, what data do I need to go and get, right? And it's actually going to go out and be able to generate those, right? So it removes some of that technical the barrier to entry, right, and allows you to have normal conversations with your AI about that. And so that's really the core of what an MCP actually does. And so we'll look at, how do you create one of these? How could you potentially use this, right, and actually be able to call your D365 environment from there. All right, so we have two more slides on AI best practices before we jump in and actually look at the different options we have here, or the different scenarios that we're going to look at today. Some of the biggest things that from taking away from an AI best practice perspective, again, always keep a human in the loop. I don't think that can be said enough, right? Don't let AIs just run wild, right? Because at the end of the day, there's got to be a human that is going to actually validate or verify the data that's being generated. There has to be somebody that is responsible for what the AI is doing. So make sure that human knows, right, that they are in charge of that. The other thing that I've seen that, at least initially, is this idea. I'm calling it the AI hammer scenario or syndrome, right, where just because you have a problem doesn't mean that AI should be used to solve it, right? There's a lot of scenarios, there are a lot of problems where AI is phenomenally good at solving that problem, but not everyone should be solved with AI, right? So two examples I have here. One is, anything that's data generation, drafting an email, building a slide deck, asking about a particular business process and looking for optimizations like we're talking about today. 100% a great use of AI. Where I maybe slightly differ from, maybe Microsoft and others, right, is I don't know if I would trust AI to go and post to my GL directly, right? That's probably not a great use case for AI. Couldn't you do it? Absolutely, right? There's nothing technically going to stop that, unless if you don't set it up or configure it. But right, from a technical perspective, there's nothing stopping an AI from doing that. But it's one of those things where do I want to make sure, or should I make sure, right, that there's a human in the loop, right, and that is confirming what the AI is doing. That would be, one of the things that I would be very cautious of in that case. Um, Again, we talked about the AI hammer, but in most cases, business cases, right, you need that repeatable process. So if you're looking for, if you have a business case and you're saying, hey, I need to build a process that, does A, B, and C, and it needs to follow these rules along the way, right? That's probably a case where you could have a workflow in place, right, instead of AI doing it. Now, could you use AI to help build that workflow? Absolutely, right? But don't let AI be the workflow in that case, right? So, if there's something in your business where you're trying to develop something to automate a process to help perform large amounts of or go and carry some of this more tedious work, absolutely, you can use AI to help build that workflow, right? But at the end of the day, right, you want that workflow actually performing the process and not AI itself. So just something else to keep in mind as we are talking about this. There's two additional things, and I've kind of referred to one of these already. One of these gets slightly technical. I've posted there's a resource for this at the end of the slide deck, but there's an entire conversation or entire presentation we can do about the idea of this context rot, right? So one of the things that we are going to talk about, right, is that you want to make sure if you're going to do data analysis across large data sets, you want to continually start with a new chat windows or resetting that context when you're talking to your AI after you do your analysis, because that entire thread, right, every time you are conversing with your LLM of choice, right, there's this idea of your context window just keeps growing and growing, right, because the entire chat gets sent out and brought back every time you're responding to your LLM, right? And so your context window keeps growing bigger and bigger. And as you get closer and closer to that context window, right, the results from your AI are going to start to diminish, right? The analysis it's going to find, the process or the responses that it's going to give are not going to be as accurate, right, as if you had started a new chat window, right? And so there's this idea of, hey, when I'm starting my analysis, I want to start a new chat window with my AI to make sure that my context is very restricted around the data that I'm providing in that case, right? And so it doesn't go off and start hallucinating on the data that it's or the responses that it's giving back. The other thing that I'll talk about here is accountability, right? And I was able to find, this is actually another one of the resources that I've provided here, right? Is that it was a IBM manual from 1979, right? And this was actually one of the first pages, right? Is that a computer can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never make a management decision, right? And so, because we can't hold these AIs accountable, right? There has to be a human attached to, right, each of these either AI or AI agents, right? We can't allow them to intrinsically, right, make a management decision within our business, right? And so there has to be a human in the loop. So even well before anybody had any thought of how artificial intelligence would be done, right, this was an idea in the computer realm, right, when IBM first started coming out and putting computers in businesses, right, that we need to make sure that we are having that human in the loop and not just relying on computers to an AI, right, to perform this analysis. All right. So with that, right, now we can switch over to prompt creation, right? How do we actually kind of configure a prompt, right, to do some of this analysis that we're looking at? And so this gets kind of into what is anatomy of a good prompt, right? There's 5 different things that we're going to kind of start to look at here. The persona of the prompt, right? So what's the tone you want the AI to respond in? This used to be much bigger, in my opinion. I don't think it's as big anymore. It used to be that you would come in and say, hey, you are acting as a data scientist, analyze this data to, find X, Y, and Z, right? You can still set the tone in this case if you want the response to be more professional or more relaxed, or if you want it to respond in a particular, format, you absolutely can do that. But that's the first thing that we're going to talk about, right, from a good prompt perspective. The second is the context. So this is where we start getting into giving the AI more background on the task it's going to perform or the data you'll provide. And the context in this case is where we'll start to get, as we start looking at prompts here in just a second, right, where we really start to tie the different pieces of data together to allow the AI to do some of the arduous work of tying different result sets together, right? The third thing is the task that you want it to do, right? So what are we actually asking the AI to do in this case? Are we asking it to analyze the data set to look for, optimizations? What are we actually wanting this AI to do with the data that we're providing it? We're going to put any constraints that we want on this. So, for example, if we only want to look for enabled users, right, or if we only want to look for certain account types or things like that. We can put those guardrails on so that the AI is not trying to look across the entire data set. It's only going to look for specific cases. And then the output format, right? How do we want those results returned? Do we want it in a PowerPoint? Do we want it in a professional dashboard? Do we want it in the chat window? Do we want it whatever format you're looking for, right? So we have to tell it what that result would be there. So those are really the 5 things that we're going to start to look at, right, when we're creating a prompt. So as an example, in this case, right, we have 2 different prompts, examples in this case. Obviously, the first one is very vague, right? And if you give a vague prompt, you're going to get a vague response, right? So if I tell the AI, analyze the attached data and look for optimizations, I don't tell it anything about the data. I don't tell it anything about, what scenarios it's trying to look for. I don't tell it anything about the output format that I want, right? So the AI has to make a lot of assumptions and guesses, right, when it's coming across this. If, on the other hand, right, if I go to prompt 2 and I tell it, hey, this data is coming from Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain, right? The attached Excel file, right? So I'm telling it the input type, right, has the following data, right? It has these tabs. The tabs contain this set of data. I'm going to look for these following scenarios. I want you to output the format in an Excel file. And oh, by the way, if you need any more information or have questions about the data, please ask, right? I've given it now the context, the format, example scenarios, right, that it's looking for. So I'm trying to give it more information on what it's actually trying to look for in the tasks that it should actually be doing. Following up on that, right, we'll look at this in just a second. If I'm supplying the data to the AI, right, I need to explain, and a lot of times it's coming in as an Excel or CSV type format, right? I need to explain what each tab and column represent, right? So one of the examples that we'll look at here in just a second, right, is I have 2 different tabs, one of them with a user, right? The data from the user info, and one of them from, maybe the vendors, right, that user should be in charge of, right? And so I can go in tab A, my user, right? I'm going to tell it the column name. I'm going to tell it the type, right? And I'm going to tell it the, what this actually means. So, tab A has a column user ID. That's a string, right? And it's the ID of the user. I have an enabled column that's going to be yes, no, that's an enum. And oh, by the way, we're only going to analyze enabled users. And then one of the big ones that I've found, especially for D365 data in particular, is telling it what the rec ID is, right? If I tell it it's a unique key, and oh, by the way, I'm going to map that rec ID across tabs, right? Then it can start to do the joins for me, and I don't have to worry about those, as much. So you can see, when I get to tab B, again, I'm going to tell it, hey, by the way, this user on tab B maps to my tab A user ID. And oh, by the way, the vendor ID on my tab B, right, is mapping to the rec ID on tab A, right? So now I can let the AI do all those joins for me, and I don't have to worry about those anymore, right? So the more I can spell out those relationships, especially in these very large normalized database relationships, right, from D365 perspective, it stops the AI from guessing and making the wrong assumption on what that data actually is. Another big thing that we'll look at here is we can take an iterative approach to this, right? Instead of trying to quote unquote one-shot this, right, and trying to get the results to come back perfectly, I can start to break this up into smaller segments, right? Validating each step of the process before I move on, and being able to correct that AI early, right? And if it's starting to drift off course or hallucinate, right, I can bring it back and say, hey, we're not looking for that. This is where we're trying to go. And so it can make it a little bit easier on that front. And again, one of the things that I found works really well is telling it what types of scenarios you're looking for, right? I'm looking for optimizations like X, Y, and Z, looking for users that I haven't logged in, looking for users assigned to roles, right, that they maybe don't or haven't used or don't need, right? Looking for roles that don't have any users assigned to them, right? If I can provide it those types of optimization or the scenarios that I'm looking for, it helps, the AI be able to pull those out and know what the mindset is that you're going in with this. And then one thing that I've found that I didn't think of initially, but has been truly beneficial, is asking when you're done with going through, right? You go through this iterative approach, you get to the very end, you get your output. A lot of the times people just close the chat window, right? Or move on to the next thing. One of the things I like to do is ask the AI, how could I improve this next time, right? What information should I have provided at first, right, to give better output? And how could I improve my future prompts, right? So you're actually asking the AI, what can you do better the next time? So you don't have to maybe take as many steps, right? Use less tokens. You can, it doesn't take it as long. Maybe you remove some of the hallucinations, right, that it developed along the way. And so, asking the AI how to, what you could do better is a key way to, again, make this iterative across your different chats that you have. All right. All right, so now we can jump into a couple different scenarios. Let me check the chat real quick, make sure there's no... Yeah, I think we're good. All right. So we have a couple data analysis scenarios. The first one that I'm going to actually show within the 3 different types is about wanting to see how I could analyze some user and role data from D365 to surface some of those optimizations, right? Looking for things like users who haven't logged in and could be disabled, cleaning up and optimizing user role assignments, optimizing user and role license assignments, right? So looking for those types of different scenarios. And really wanting to, again, go across 3 different ways for us to be able to export that data, right? First one we're going to show is a manual export, where you as a user are going in and actually exporting the data. The second one is using OData API, right, to actually connect from your AI to D365 and being able to pull the data that you would like. And then the third is that MCP server, right, where you're just asking questions to the MCP and the MCP is figuring out what endpoints and data it needs to go and hit. All right, so if we're jumping in to, once we kind of figure out what scenarios we're trying to actually, analyze in this case, right? The second thing is we have to know where this data actually resides. And so I provided a blog post that I've written in the past of, if you have a particular form in D365 and you want to start asking questions about the data on that form, but you need to either know the data entity or the data source of where that data actually resides, you can, there's a couple different ways you can go about actually going to see where that data is coming from. There's more than likely either a data entity or at worst case scenario, right, you could actually get the data source itself to be exposed in that case, right, where you could hit it or pull the data from it at least. But we have to at some point figure out where that data is actually residing. In our use case, right, we're really looking at a couple different data entities that are delivered from Microsoft, right? The system user, the security role or security user role org. And so that security user role data entities. You can go down to the security user role organization if you want. In our case, we don't need to, but those are the three that we're going to hit, right? And so those already exist in that case. And then for the first example here, I'm also going to go to another system, right, which pulls in the telemetry data. So if you use the monitoring and telemetry functionality in D365, that's going to track your user usage in the system, and it's going to store that data in application insights. And so we can actually use that to get things like what forms that user is going to, when's the last time that user logged in. And so we can add that data into the data we're getting from D365 to help us make even more accurate business decisions in this case. All right, so the first option we're looking at here is the manual data extraction, right? So this is really good for one-off exploration. There's really no setup required as far as the connecting to D365, right? Because you're the one actually going in and extracting this data. And so really, we're just looking to get the data out of whatever source system we're pulling this data from, and then adding it to a prompt in your AI of choice for it to do the analysis across there. So in our case, right, I'm going to use the data management framework to actually go in and export and I apologize, this is a little small, but the user info, the security user role, and the security role data entities, right? And in that case, then it can export that data into either Excel or CSV format. So I created a export job, had all three of these run, and had it export to an Excel file in my case, or CSV. I then went and actually queried application insights directly. And in this case, I got the last login of the user. So I was actually querying the page views of that user and basically taking the last time that there was a page view for each of the users, right? And that was giving me the last login or the last time that this user actually used the system. And then what I did was I basically took all of those that data, right, and put it into one Excel spreadsheet, right, on having each of those data sources on one tab, right, and being able to consolidate that data under one Excel workbook. And then I started generating the prompt itself. So this is, obviously not the initial, this was an iterative approach to create this prompt, but you're going to be able to see a lot of the 5 different things that we were talking about earlier, right? Basically telling it what's the input type of the data that we're giving it, right? So I basically say, hey, I attached an Excel file. There are 4 different tabs. Here are the tab names. Here's what the different data sources actually mean, or what data those contain, and then broke it out by each of the tabs itself, right? And gave the column names of each of the columns that existed and the data that exists in each of those, and told it that the any joins to the other tabs, right? So it could know exactly, hey, here's where I'm going to join to these other tabs, or here's where the data matches up, right, or can be joined together. And then at the bottom, right, I said, hey, please analyze the file for the following scenarios. And then I wanted it to create a waived remediation approach, right, looking for optimizations. And I gave it a couple examples, right? Identify if there's any users that are enabled but aren't assigned any roles. Identify roles that aren't assigned any users. I want you to create an overview of the number of users assigned each role, right? And looking for most assigned to least assigned. Find out any users that have logged in the last 30 days. And then along the way, provide any other data analysis feedback that you have, right? So I basically gave it a couple of defined criteria, and then said, oh, by the way, if you find anything else, right, that matches up or is similar to anything that I've asked for, right, call that out as well. And then by the way, I want you to present this as a C-suite level overview, right, that I can look at and give to my technical resources later on, right, for remediation. So went in my case, I use Claude. You can do the same thing for Copilot or Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever you would like. Always keep in mind your data governance, right? So in this case, I'm using a test D365 account, so I didn't really care about the data governance side of things, but always make sure that if your organization has a enterprise agreement with one of these LLM providers, that you're using that and not the public version, right? So you're not uploading client data or end user data to any of those. But basically went in and said, hey, here's my prompt, here's my data in that Excel format, and then basically let it go and start the analysis in that case, right? And so it was very quickly within 5 to 10 minutes able to analyze the data and start to give me different waves of things I needed to do. Hey, this is your first quick wins. Hey, this is for your next wave, right? And then we're looking farther out in wave 3 and your low risk, right? And in your wave 4, right? So kind of broke it out by the biggest impact, right? Or the things I needed to take care of first to the very least, right? And ordered this and presented a very nice overview in the Excel format so that I could, take this and start to perform those remediation options. And so it also had, broke this out by wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, and wave 4, and other general feedback, additional insights, right? So it was able to go through and very quickly find things that I could go in and remediate in this case. So, really, really cool to be able to see it generate this the data analysis, right? For the data provided. So a couple key things that I'll point out here, right? There's no additional cost if you're doing it this way, right, above your normal subscription. Again, if you're using enterprise plans, it's a little bit different from a costing perspective. Obviously, you may have a per request or per prompt or token, obviously payment in that case, right? But for my Claude subscription, right, I didn't have to pay anything above my normal subscription pricing to be able to run this input, right? It still had usage tied to it, but there wasn't anything above that that I had to go out and pay. You want to make sure you're keeping your usage limits in mind, especially if you're starting to use some of the frontier type models, right? Whether it's Fable from Claude, the DUG24, right, or Soul. If you're using some of these frontier type models, you can go through your usage very, very quickly. So make sure that you kind of weigh that against which model you're running this against versus the amount of data that you're having to process and the overall scenarios you're trying to look for in that case. And this is really great if you're trying to do one-off explorations or point-in-time snapshots of your data, and you're just trying to get a better viewpoint of kind of where you could potentially go and make changes, right? If you're trying to analyze real-time data with this type of method, it's going to be very, very difficult for that, right? And there's probably a better approach to it. Again, this is really good for that, the snapshotting of that data. All right, so second part to this, right, is you can start automating this via an API. So instead of you having to go out and generate this data manually, right, what if I had our AI actually go out and query those endpoints and get the data from those endpoints itself, right? So I could actually start to do this, and I did go through and had Claude start to generate a API connection that I could use that was from Claude to D365, and actually was calling those same types of endpoints that I have set up or we talked about previously. So instead of having to go out and run and export the data manually, right, I can have my my API connection through my large language model actually make those calls, right? So this process that I started here, right, was actually creating the API service that I would use to make that particular call. And so at the end of this, it was able to go out and actually create a fully working application to actually go out and make those calls. You can actually go out. It's on my GitHub if you'd like to go out and try it. It's called Claude D365 Analyzer. The key part in here, right, is that we took the prompt that we used before and put that in as part of the library of prompts that you could actually run this against. And so you could have a number of different prompts in your prompt library, right, that you could run against D365 if you had, a set of different things that you wanted to go and analyze. And so the other thing that I'll call out here is that you can see that it's actually hitting the same data entities that I was using previously, right? Still the system user, still the security role, still the security user role, data entities, right? And I can put filters on those as well if I only want to pull in certain data or, add to the columns to the select statements. I can be very precise on what I actually want to return in that case. And so when I run this application now, right, I can actually say, hey, I want to go out and do a user role analysis. It also actually created a couple other demo prompts, right, from a financial data analysis or inventory analysis, right? But the one that we really care about is that user role analysis. You can see that it actually went out and made the request. It actually created the output of this. It created it in its working directory. So it said that I was like 33K, I think, in this case, right? And then it also at the end of it said how many input and output tokens we used in that case, right? So had to go out and generate this, the user role analysis with the same exact prompt that we were looking at previously, right? And just put it into this application. You can see that it actually went out and created the data export in that case. And I think I have the security access. Yeah. The same report here, right? I can see that I actually downloaded, right? And so you can see that it's basically the same type of information we were looking at before, right? It's going to tell you your wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, wave 4, your login activity, right? It's breaking it out in that fashion, right? So we were able to generate the same type of output analysis here, right? Based on the input analysis in that case. So as part of the output of this, right, we're able to see that generated. All right. One key point with using this API functionality is that this is not covered under your normal subscription pricing. Doesn't matter if you're running Copilot, Claude, ChatGPT. Anytime you start, you're not going through your normal subscription method of interacting with the AI, right? You have to pay for every interaction to the LLM in general, right? And so in this case, right, that request of me going out and actually running this took about 78 cents, and this was on Sonnet. I don't remember exactly which model, but one of the earlier Summit models, right? So you can see here that you want to make sure that you're, again, keeping in mind what model you're running it against, as well as, trying to weigh, right, the cost benefit analysis of, do I want this to be automated to the point where, I don't have to have a user go out and do this, or is it more practical, right, to have the user just go out and run the extraction yourself and save the potential API costs on this, right? So it's really better in this case to have this for scheduled pipelines or things you're going to run repeatedly in your environment, right? So that you can automate and actually recoup the cost of having that API token, right? 78 cents may not be, groundbreaking in this case, right? But if you're going to run this, 1,000 times, 100,000 times, right, you can see how that adds up over time, to just depending on how often you're going to run this. All right, so the last type that we're going to look at here, the last different way of gathering this data, right, is MCP. And so there is the built-in MCP from a Copilot perspective that we can also do this for, right? So if you want to skip building your own MCP or want to go that route, you absolutely can. I did want to show that you can do this from Claude still. I can create an MCP from Claude and actually have it connected to D365. It used to be that Copilot didn't, and ChatGPT for that matter, didn't support MCP in the same way that Anthropic did. Now you're starting to see more industry standard support for MCP. So this was a little bit bigger of a lift in some cases, right? But I did want to show that you could still do this. So in this case, right, what we can actually do, and again, just like I did for the API, right, I can ask Claude to help me go in and actually create an MCP server for D365, right? So I gave it the endpoints that I wanted to actually hit, and the different tools, or told it which tools I actually wanted it to include in this case, right? And it's able to go out and actually create the application, right, that it's going to use to make these calls. And so in this case, right, I can build this application, right? In this case, it's a .NET C# application. I can go and build this and actually add it to my Claude desktop configuration file, right, as an MCP server, and say, hey, when, if somebody references this D365-security, right, this is the MCP server you're running. This is where it's listening and executing at, right? So I can point it at a particular D365 instance, and all of the tools that it creates would be available, right? So it knows, hey, if I ask about users, it knows, it translates that into well, I probably need to go out and grab my user list, right? And I'm going to hit the system user data entity, right? So it knows all of those different connections across there. So in this case, right, I can basically go into my cloud environment, right, and say, hey, again, I want to use my D365 security MCP. I'm doing a security review. I'm looking for these optimizations, looking for this types of scenarios in this case, right? And, why don't you create a waved approach again for remediations, organizing it from highest priority to least priority, right? And it says, great, let me go and grab the data first, right? And it's able to go out and generate this. Obviously, this is in Delinea branding and all of that, right? But you could put whatever branding you wanted on it. But the whole idea, right, is that it's able to know, I just talked to it and said, hey, here's what I'm looking for. It's able to know, hey, here's how I need to go and actually piece this all together, right? And the requests I need to go and get. Again, this is available on my GitHub, right? So if you want to go and use that, you absolutely can. It's open source there. So feel free to check that out. All right, so we have a side-by-side comparison, right? I think we've kind of looked at it, from a manual to direct API to MCP, right? How, what are the pros and cons of each of these? And so you can, kind of see based on what your requirements are, which one of these might be the most beneficial, right? So again, if you're trying to, doing one-off explorations, right, that manual data gathering may be the way to go. But if you want interactive analysis or scheduled pipelines, right, maybe the API or MCP server might be better for you in that case. All right, so I did tease at the beginning, right, that we're going to look at licensing as well. And so I did want to give a quick example, right, now that we kind of have the background of how we set this up for the security side, right, how do you do the same thing for licensing? So one of the things that you can go and do now is use all of the things we've looked at previously to go to a brand new scenario and help us get it, and be able to do analysis over top of it. So we can actually go, if we wanted to do a license review, right, or an analysis, right, we could first go to the user security governance area, the license usage summary report. I can go and see where that data is actually coming from, right? I can use that form information to figure out the data source of this. And if I dig into this particular form a little bit, I can see this is coming from, let's see, the role summary security role. If I jump into my AOS, right, my Visual Studio, I can actually see, oh, by the way, this is actually coming from the role summary. If I go and get that role summary data and I bundle that up and I use the same user and role data that I was looking at previously, from system user and security user role, right now I have the role summary data or the role license data, right, from this license user summary report, and I have the user and user role data from the other data entities that I looked at previously. And now I can start to ask it questions about, hey, I want to do a license analysis and I want to look to see where I could potentially save money on licensing costs, right? So this is a great example of being able to take the idea that we looked at earlier and applying it to something else, right? So we're able to go in and actually look to say, where are there areas that I could improve my licensing just based on the roles that this user's assigned, the role license data, right? And looking to say, are there places where I could potentially, save money either by looking at removing roles from a user or lowering the overall cost of that role based on the access that's provided, right? So really, really cool stuff that you can do there as well. All right, so a couple of key things to remember, right? AI isn't magic, but it's really, really good at pattern matching, right? Which is a lot of the times what we're doing when we're looking at data analysis, all right? But again, you want to make sure that you're keeping a human in the loop and checking the output of this, right? It's very, very good, but it's not infallible, right? So we want to make sure that we are still double checking the work. Again, we want to avoid that AI hammer, right? A lot of the things that we looked at here, the data analysis piece, 100% is things that you could use AI on, but just don't force the AI to be the whole solution, right? If it doesn't need to be. And then, like we talked about, start small and then scale up, right? The prompts that I had there, the ideas that I was presenting, right, were not I didn't start at any of those. That was something I kind of worked up to get the prompts right, to get everything to show nicely in the presentation here, right? But it was, when I first started, it was, how do I do this one thing, right? And then you start scaling it up and adding additional things to it. So a few key takeaways, right? If you have vague prompts, you're going to get vague answers, right? So always make sure that you're explaining the data to the AI so it can help analyze it, right? The more analysis you can give to the AI on kind of what this data is, how it looks like, how it's connected, right, is one more assumption that the AI doesn't have to make and potentially hallucinate on, right? You don't really have to be a computer expert or AI expert to use AI, right? But you do, again, if you start small, you validate the process and you take on more complex scenarios, right? You can absolutely get there. Obviously, the best time to clean up your D365 data was at go live. The next best time is today, right? So these are things that you can take and take to your D365 environment today to start that analysis process. At the end of this slide deck are some blog articles and prompting best practices, and basically where I grabbed a lot of the information from for the slide deck today. And with that, I will take any questions that have popped up. And I apologize, I kind of on a roll there, so I haven't been watching the chat super closely. If you do want a copy of the slide deck, I'm sure Bobby and Beau will send it out, but I also uploaded it to my website. If you want the QR code will get you there if you want to go and download it. Thank you guys for joining today, and happy to answer any questions before we jump over to the next session.
Yeah, Alex, we have a couple quick questions, and we'll try to get through them before we get over there. One, just maybe a small, tidbit on GCC. Somebody asked earlier when you were talking about MCP servers and just, what's the breadth of what GCC Cloud is doing right now and what they can use?
Yeah. One of the topics I kind of avoided because it opens a can of worms is the governance side. And I know that's kind of hypocritical for me to say as a security guy. But that's a very, very deep conversation that you probably need to have, right, with your organization, right? When you start getting into GCC high type of data, right, and you're trying to connect MCPs to it or AI to it in general, a lot of other times I think companies kind of just default to avoiding that simply because they don't want to have to try and work out the complexities of mapping out where is this data going to live, how's it being processed, how do I get an AI to forget data, right, if something were to come up and we actually accidentally uploaded the data, right? So it's one of those things where I don't know of any, Beau, feel free to correct me if you know anything, but I don't know of any native support for GCC or GCC high as far as out-of-box MCPs or anything like that from that perspective.
Yeah, when we recap this, I just talked to a gentleman who's been pretty involved in that, worked in the government public sector side at Microsoft, named Ryan Dorheim. And there's just not a lot at this point, still slow moving. So,
Alex, one more question. in the chat, can you please talk a little bit about, this is a totally loaded kind of question, a little bit about F&O out of the box AI agents, how to enable them, how they're charged, how do you like them? Yeah.
Yeah, just in general.
I mean, that could be a 60-minute
Yep.
session.
I'm gonna let you wrap this side up, Beau. I'm gonna jump
Yep.
over into the other session.
Okay.
I'm gonna drop the link here in chat again. It's starting now, so if you're loving this and you want to keep going and you want to stay up with us, we're wherever you are, we're still rolling. Obviously 24 hours. So that's what's happening now. So we, like they say at the bar when it comes to closing time, you can't stay here, but you don't have to go home. So
Yeah.
we're kicking you out here, but we do need you. We do want you to join us at the next session. So we'll see you over there. And Alex, thanks again. Thanks again to all you who joined us here, and hopefully I'll see you guys over there.
Thanks, Bobby.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Beau, I think there's a lot of it's growing in number too there, but there's a lot of native AI functionality that may or may not be well documented, right, in D365 currently. And I think there's different levels of how effective it is in the functionality of those. So there's some of these like invoice capture, right? I think that has become fairly ubiquitous, right, across the board of like being able to capture expenses and invoices and things like that. There's other things that demo really well, right? But if you have very clean data and very siloed, like the supply chain agent, I think can work very well in certain cases, right? Or the field service agent is another one, right? As far as trying to map out how the field service, it looks really cool when we see Microsoft demo it, right? But in practice, it becomes a little bit trickier to implement. I don't know if you have any feelings on, some of those agents as well, but some of they're different levels of maturity across the board, I think, in some of those as well.
I mean, I agree, Alex. I think the maturity conversation is certainly interesting, considering all of this is roughly 3 years old, right? So we talk about maturity in this kind of era a little differently than a traditional company that's been around 50 years talks about maturity. Now, I think Donna also hit that nail on the head, right? You hear things like companies that have been around 100 years are a little less have a little less appetite to jump onto this train or trend because most of the companies that are leaders are 2 years old. Mm-hmm. So it becomes kind of a risk profile from their perspective. And I agree with Donna. That's a big reason why Microsoft is winning in the space, is because they've got a deep tradition on handling transformation. So I forget who asked that question. It might have been Wayne. I don't know, Wayne, if that answered your question, but feel free to reach out to Alex or myself or both of us. We'd love to jump on a call and just have a fun conversation about that. I know the Dynamics Stats loves to talk about that kind of thing, so we'd love to have you on and have a fun combo. With that, Alex, great to have you. Hopefully see you on the next stream. We're ending this one. Please, I'm going to post that link again for you all to click. And we'll see you over on the next one. April is about to kick off her keynote in 4 minutes. So quickly jump off this one, jump on the next one. It's just a simple link click away, and we'll see you over there. Thanks again, Alex. Great job.
You guys.